A millionaire is having lunch alone in a luxury restaurant when a poor girl approaches him to beg for money. She suddenly stops upon seeing the golden locket hanging on his chest and whispers with unsettling innocence, "Sir, that woman is my mother." He reacts with a cruel, ironic smile and sends her away, thinking it's a scam. 20 minutes later, she returns carrying something wrapped in dirty cloth. When he discovers what it is, tears begin to fall down his face. The afternoon sun bathed the terrace of the Seraphine in liquid gold, a setting perfectly aligned with the clientele who frequented the city's most exclusive restaurant. Arthur Vance, a 45-year-old man whose name was synonymous with success in the world of high finance, felt like a stranger on this stage of opulence. He was there, surrounded by silver cutlery and crystal stemware that reflected the light, but his mind was miles away, immersed in profit projection spreadsheets and the stock prices that composed his vast fortune. The waiter, discreet and efficient, had served the main course 10 minutes ago, but Arthur had barely touched his food. His fingers, out of a habit that had become almost unconscious, sought the cool, familiar contour of the gold locket that hung on his chest, hidden beneath his impeccably pressed linen shirt. It was his ritual, his private sanctuary. With a soft, almost inaudible click, he opened the small reliquary, and the smiling face of Helena, his late wife, looked back at him. The photograph, worn at the edges from constant touch, was the anchor that kept him tethered to a past he refused to let go. To the world, Arthur was a multi-millionaire whose ability to turn capital into more capital was legendary, a man who navigated the stock market with the same ease that others breathed. But in that small golden circle, he was just a man who had lost his compass. His life had become a routine of grueling work, a deliberate escape from any intimacy or connection that might fill the void Helena had left. It was in this moment of silent introspection that a small shadow fell across the white tablecloth. He raised his eyes, irritation already forming in his features. It was a little girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old, with bare feet and a dress that had once been floral, now faded and with a small tear in the hem. Her eyes, large and brown, seemed to carry a seriousness that didn't belong to a child. Arthur sighed, preparing for the rehearsed speech he used to dismiss the beggars who, from time to time, managed to slip past the restaurant's security. He opened his mouth to say something curt and final, perhaps offer a few bills to get her to leave him alone. But the girl didn't hold out her hand. She didn't look at the untouched plate of food or the leather wallet on the table. Her gaze was fixed, mesmerized, on the locket Arthur still held open between his fingers. The intensity of her focus was so unusual that it left him momentarily speechless. She took a hesitant step closer, tilting her head as if trying to get a better look at the tiny image. Arthur's heart, a muscle he believed had become purely functional, gave an uncomfortable lurch. There was a disturbing familiarity in the way the girl furrowed her brow, an echo of a gesture he knew well. Before he could process the feeling, she raised her index finger, her small, trembling hand pointing directly at Helena's photograph. Her voice, when she finally spoke, was a near inaudible murmur, but it cut through the air like shattering crystal. "Mister, that woman is my mommy." For an instant, Arthur's world shrank to the sound of his own heart beating erratically against his ribs. The girl's words hung in the air, absurd and profane, desecrating the sacred sanctuary he had built around Helena's memory. The initial disbelief quickly gave way to a wave of ice-cold contempt. He, who had built a financial empire based on his ability to read people and anticipate their moves, saw in this scene the most obvious and pathetic of traps. It was a scam, without a doubt. A cruel grift, designed to exploit the one vulnerability his vast wealth couldn't protect, his grief. He raised his face, and a wry smile devoid of any warmth curved his lips. He saw the girl not as a hungry child, but as the tip of an iceberg of greed, a pawn in a game orchestrated by someone who knew his story, his loss, his reclusiveness, someone who knew about the locket. "A nice try, kiddo," he said, his voice low and cutting, each word sharpened with the cynicism that protected him from the world. "But your acting needs work. Tell whoever sent you. They'll need a much better story to get any money out of me." The girl blinked, her large eyes filling with a genuine confusion that, for a split second, almost shook Arthur's certainty. "It's not acting, sir," she whispered, her voice trembling. "It's her. I know her smile. Mommy smiled like that when she looked at the stars." The mention of such a specific detail, so Helena, sent a splinter of irritation through him. It was a well-rehearsed script, designed to wound. He wouldn't allow it. With an imperious and weary gesture, he summoned the restaurant manager, Jean-Pierre, a man who ran the establishment with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker. Jean-Pierre, sensing the disturbance at his most valued client's table, approached immediately, his face a mask of concerned professionalism. "Is there a problem, Mr. Vance?" he asked in a low voice. "Please, handle this," Arthur said, without even looking at the girl. "Just remove her from here." Jean-Pierre nodded, understanding instantly. With a firm gentleness, he leaned toward the girl. "Come on, little one. You can't be in here. Come, I'll get you a glass of juice in the kitchen." The girl took a step back, her gaze fixed on Arthur, a mixture of pleading and hurt. "But I just wanted him to see it's my mommy." Her insistence only solidified Arthur's conviction. He leaned back in his chair, closing the locket with a definitive click, as if he could lock Helena's memory safely away from this farce. He watched, impassive, as Jean-Pierre led the girl away from the terrace, her small body disappearing through the service door. Silence returned to his table. But now it was a heavy, contaminated silence. The food on his plate tasted like ashes. He had won the small battle, exposed the scam, restored his peace. So why did he feel such a profound discomfort, an agitation that work and wealth couldn't quell? He tried to focus on business, on the next investment, on the profitability of his assets, but the image of that child's eyes wouldn't leave him. 20 minutes later, as he waited for the check, his gaze drifted to the entrance of the property, and there she was again, standing on the sidewalk, outside the restaurant's wrought iron gates, looking directly at him. This time, she wasn't empty-handed. She was holding a small, dirty cloth bundle, extending it in his direction with a solemnity that made him hold his breath. Arthur's irritation morphed into a cold, controlled fury. The girl's persistence was an insult to his intelligence. He saw it as a siege, a tactic of emotional attrition. She wasn't just asking for money, she was trying to invade the one space he kept inviolable, the memory of his wife. His first instinct was to ignore her, pay the check, and leave through the back entrance, leaving her on the sidewalk like a forgotten footnote to his ruined afternoon. His vast fortune had taught him to be ruthless with those who tried to take advantage of him, but something stopped him. It wasn't pity, he convinced himself. It was a morbid curiosity, the need to see just how far the audacity of this farce would go. He wanted to unmask the scam personally, to look into the eyes of whoever was behind this child and make it clear that Arthur Vance was not a man to be trifled with. He stood up, the wicker chair groaning in protest, and walked with firm, decisive steps across the terrace, crossing the perfectly manicured lawn that separated the restaurant from the street. The other patrons watched him, whispering about the eccentric multi-millionaire who rarely interacted with the outside world. As he approached the gate, the disparity between them was stark. His polished Italian leather shoes trod on the soft grass, while the girl's bare feet were planted on the hot, dirty concrete of the sidewalk. She didn't flinch as he stopped before her, separated only by the iron bars. She just continued to hold out the small bundle. What is this?" he asked, his voice devoid of any emotion. "Another trick, a forged photo. What do you want?" The girl shook her head, her serious eyes fixed on his. "It's for you," she repeated, her voice low but steady. "Mommy said that if I ever found the man with the locket," with her smile, "I should give this to him. She said you would know what to do." The man with the locket. The phrase hit him like a punch. It was an intimate detail, almost a secret nickname. No one knew of his obsession with the locket. He kept it hidden, a private ritual. With an abrupt gesture, he reached through the bars and took the bundle. The fabric was rough and thin, likely a piece of an old bedsheet. It smelled of dust and something vaguely sweet like cheap soap. He held it with his fingertips, as if handling something contagious. For a moment, he thought of throwing it on the ground without opening it, ending the theater right there. But curiosity, that treacherous spark of weakness, won. With slow, deliberate movements, he began to undo the knot holding the fabric together. He expected to find a poorly written note, a plea for money, perhaps a worthless trinket. What he didn't expect was what was inside. It was a single sheet of paper, folded several times, yellowed and fragile at the creases, as if it had been kept for years. He unfolded it carefully, his heart beginning to accelerate against his will, and then he saw it. The paper was covered in a fluid, elegant script, the letters slanted to the right in an unmistakable way. The blood seemed to drain from his face, his breath caught in his throat. He didn't need to read a single word. He knew that handwriting as he knew the back of his own hand. He had seen it on love notes left on his pillow, on grocery lists, on annotations in the margins of his books. It was Helena's handwriting, flawless, unequivocal, and at the bottom of the page, visible even with the paper still partially folded, was her full, unmistakable signature, Helena Croft Vance. The world around Arthur dissolved into an indistinct hum. The sound of traffic, the distant conversations, the rustling of leaves in the afternoon breeze, it all became background noise to the deafening sound of his own blood pulsing in his ears. The handwriting on the page was a ghost, a voice from the grave speaking directly to him. His first instinct, the reaction forged in years of high-stakes negotiations and asset protection, was denial, forgery. The word echoed in his mind, a desperate shield against the truth the letter threatened to unearth. It was an exquisite forgery, no doubt. Someone must have studied Helena's signature, perhaps from old documents, and hired a master to replicate it. It was the only logical explanation. People would do anything for a piece of his fortune, for access to his empire of business and investments. He looked at the girl, who was watching him with a quiet patience, her eyes mirroring a wisdom that disarmed him. He stepped back from the gate, turning his back on her, and walked toward his car, a luxury sedan waiting discreetly in the private lot. He needed silence. He needed to think, seated on the soft leather. The smell of newness and wealth surrounding him, he fully unfolded the sheet of paper. His hands, which signed multi-million-dollar checks without a tremor, were unsteady. He began to read. "My dearest Arthur," the letter began, "if you are reading this, it means our little secret has found its way to you, and I am no longer here to explain. Forgive me. Forgive my silence and my fear. I know you never wanted children. I remember that night in our library, when you told me your focus was on building a legacy, a fortune that would last for generations, and that a child would be a distraction we couldn't afford. I understood, or pretended to, because I loved you too much to be the cause of your frustration." A memory, sharp and painful, pierced Arthur's mind. He saw himself in that library, the smell of old books and polished wood, Helena looking at him with hopeful eyes as he, blinded by his ambition, lectured about dividends and the cash flow of his companies. He had said those exact words. Who, besides Helena, could have known that? The letter continued, each sentence a blow to his armor of skepticism. "But life, my love, has its own plans. I found out I was pregnant weeks after that conversation. My first impulse was to tell you, but fear paralyzed me. The fear of your rejection, not of me, but of her. So, I made a decision that has haunted me every day. I raised our daughter, our little Liana, in a place where no one would find us. I wanted to give you time. I hoped your heart would soften, that you would realize true wealth isn't in the assets we accumulate, but in the love we share. I planned to tell you everything, I swear, but my time ran out. She is yours, Arthur. She has your determined eyes and my smile. Please, take care of her. Arthur let the paper fall into his lap. The air in the luxury car seemed thin, suffocating. Liana, the name was like an unknown yet familiar melody. He looked through the windshield, back at the girl still waiting at the gate. Her determined eyes, Helena's smile. The most elaborate forgery in the world couldn't manufacture those details, those intimate memories that were the foundation of their marriage. Doubt, a slow and potent venom, began to seep into his veins, dissolving his certainty, shattering his defenses. Denial was no longer a shield, it was a cage. He opened the car door, his heart hammering out a rhythm of panic and a strange, terrifying hope. He walked back to the gate, the letter crumpled in his hand. He looked at the girl, Liana, and for the first time, he didn't see a grifter. He saw the possibility of a truth so devastating it could rewrite his entire life. He didn't know what to say, what to do, but he knew he couldn't just drive away. He had to know. He needed the truth, no matter the cost. He signaled to the security guard, who opened the gate with an electronic click. He stopped in front of her, the vastness of his world colliding with the smallness of hers. "Come with me," he said, his voice hoarse and unrecognizable. The journey from the upscale restaurant to Arthur's penthouse, a sanctuary of glass and steel in the heart of the financial district, was made in a dense, uncomfortable silence. Liana sat on the edge of the leather seat, as still as a porcelain doll, her bare feet hovering inches above the plush carpet. She stared out the window with a restrained curiosity, watching the skyscrapers that scratched at the sky, a world so far removed from the dusty alley she called home. Arthur drove mechanically, his hands gripping the steering wheel with unnecessary force. His mind was a whirlwind. Helena's letter lay on the passenger seat, her handwriting a silent accusation. Every word was a piece of a puzzle he never knew existed. Guilt, a feeling he was a master at suppressing with long work hours and strategic acquisitions, began to eat away at his defenses. He remembered that library conversation vividly. He was at the height of a negotiation to acquire a tech firm, a move that would significantly increase his net worth. Helena had come in, holding 2 glasses of wine, and had asked, with that softness that was uniquely hers, if he'd ever thought about filling the big, empty house with the laughter of children. His response had been cold, calculating, a speech about legacy, about the importance of building an empire before considering heirs. He had seen the light in her eyes, dim slightly, but she had just smiled and changed the subject. At the time, he'd taken it as understanding. Now, he saw it as a stab wound. When they reached the penthouse, the private elevator opened directly into a vast, minimalist living room with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. The decor was impeccable, expensive, and completely impersonal. It was a showroom, not a home. Liana stopped at the entrance, her eyes wide with astonishment. "It's like heaven," she whispered. Arthur led her to a white sofa, where she sat rigidly, afraid of soiling the immaculate fabric. He went to the bar and poured himself a glass of water, needing something to do with his hands. He needed a plan, a strategy. "I need to verify this," he said, his voice sounding strange in his own home. "The letter, everything. I'll hire the best people. They'll run some tests. Do you understand?" Liana just nodded. Not truly comprehending what tests meant, she simply trusted the man with the locket. Her mother had said he would take care of her. Arthur spent the next few days in a flurry of controlled activity. He contacted his personal lawyer, Marcus Thorne, a pragmatic and discreet man who managed the legal aspects of his vast empire. He also hired a private genetics lab, the most reputable in the country, demanding absolute secrecy. The process was quick and clinical. A cheek swab from Liana, a blood sample from Arthur. While they waited for the results, a new obstacle began to form, coming from a direction he should have anticipated. His family, his younger sister, Beatrice, and her husband, Richard, who lived comfortably off the dividends of a trust fund Arthur had established for them, had heard about the girl's sudden appearance. The news had spread like wildfire. Beatrice showed up at his penthouse unannounced, her face a mask of manufactured concern. "Arthur, darling, what is this I'm hearing? Some street urchin. You can't possibly be falling for this, can you?" she said, gesturing with her bejeweled hands. "It's clearly a scam. These people are like vultures, always circling wealth, waiting for a moment of weakness." Richard, standing behind her, added with an air of false wisdom, "They must have studied your life, Arthur. They knew about Helena, about your grief. It's emotional manipulation of the worst kind. You need to protect yourself. Protect your legacy." Arthur listened, a coldness settling in his chest. He saw right through their concern. They weren't worried about his emotional well-being. They were worried about the inheritance. The existence of a legitimate daughter would drastically change the line of succession to his billion-dollar empire, threatening the life of luxury to which they had become accustomed. The seed of doubt they planted, however, found fertile ground in his own ingrained suspicion. What if they were right? What if the letter, the handwriting, the intimate details were all part of an incredibly elaborate conspiracy? The phone rang, interrupting the argument. It was the lab. The results were in. Arthur's heart hammered against his ribcage with the force of an auctioneer's gavel. He moved away from his sister and brother-in-law, walking toward the panoramic window as if the vastness of the city could give him the space he needed to breathe. He put the phone to his ear, his hand trembling slightly. "Dr. Evans," he said, his voice firmer than he felt. "I'm listening." On the other end of the line, the geneticist's voice was calm, professional, and unequivocal. "Mr. Vance, we've completed the comparative DNA analysis as requested. The genetic markers are conclusive. The probability of paternity between yourself and the girl, Liana, is 99.99999%. The percentage hung in the air, an absolute and undeniable number in a world of uncertainties. 99.99999%. It wasn't a possibility, it was a biological fact, etched into the fundamental code of their existence. The floor seemed to vanish from beneath Arthur's feet. He gripped the window frame, his knuckles white. The letter was real. The girl was real. Helena had had a daughter. His daughter. A whirlwind of emotions hit him at once. Shock, anger at the secret kept, a deep ache over Helena's silent betrayal. And beneath it all, a spark of something he didn't dare name, something that felt dangerously like joy. He hung up the phone without a goodbye and turned to face Beatrice and Richard. Their faces, once filled with false concern, now showed genuine apprehension. They had read the truth in Arthur's expression. "She's my daughter," he said, the words coming out with a weight that seemed to change the very atmosphere of the room. The DNA test confirmed it. The silence that followed was heavy and charged. Beatrice was the first to break it, her voice rising an octave. "DNA? Arthur, you can't be this naive. Those tests can be manipulated. The lab could have been bribed. It's a conspiracy, I'm telling you. This child and her accomplices are after your money, our inheritance. They will do anything." Richard, ever his wife's echo, added, "She's right. Think about it, Arthur. It's too convenient." A poor girl shows up out of nowhere with a fantastic story, and suddenly she's your heir. We need to fight this. Hire our own experts, investigate this girl's past, find out who's behind her. Their words, meant to sow discord, had the opposite effect. The raw, greedy mention of inheritance and money ignited a protective fury in Arthur, an instinct he didn't know he possessed. He looked over at Lyanna, who was huddled on the sofa, watching the argument with frightened eyes. She wasn't a grifter or a conspiracy. She was a scared child, caught in the middle of a drama she hadn't created. "Enough," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "She is my daughter. This matter is closed." But he knew it wasn't. The DNA confirmation wasn't the end of the battle. It was just the beginning. He saw in his family's eyes not acceptance, but the promise of a war for the vast fortune he had built. A war that would be fought in the courts, in the press, and, most painfully of all, within the walls of his own home. He had spent his life building an empire of assets, stocks, and deals, but now he faced a different kind of conflict, one that would test not his financial acumen, but the strength of his character. As Beatrice and Richard left, casting venomous glares at Lyanna, a new sound filled the silence of the penthouse. It was a small, choked sob. Arthur turned and saw Lyanna crying silently, tears streaming down her dirty face. She looked up at him, the pain of a lifetime in her childish eyes. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she whispered. "Mommy said you'd be happy." The innocence of her words was the cruelest twist of all. A dagger that pierced Arthur's heart more deeply than any financial manipulation or family betrayal. Lyanna's words, "Mommy said you'd be happy," echoed in Arthur's mind long after his sister and brother-in-law had gone. The phrase, so simple and filled with a child's faith, crumbled the last of his emotional defenses. He looked at the girl huddled on the sofa, a tiny figure lost in the vastness of his sterile penthouse, and saw not a problem to be managed, but a broken promise. Helena had believed he would be happy. She had held onto that hope, even in the face of his cold, distant ambition. Guilt hit him with the force of a tidal wave, threatening to drown him. He slowly approached the sofa and, for the first time, sat beside her, not as a skeptical millionaire or a potential father, but simply as a man confronted with the consequences of his choices. "You're not causing trouble, Lyanna," he said, his voice hoarse. I am happy. I'm just surprised." It was both a lie and a truth. Happiness was uncharted territory, but surprise was an ocean in which he was drowning. In the following days, Arthur tried to create a routine. He hired a kind housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, to care for Lyanna, bought new clothes, toys, and books. He transformed one of the guest rooms, overlooking the park, into a little girl's room, with walls painted a soft pink and a canopy bed that looked like something out of a fairy tale. He was trying to build a bridge across the 7-year chasm that separated them, using the materials he knew best, money and resources, but the bridge remained fragile. Lyanna was quiet and watchful, moving through the penthouse like a little ghost. She politely thanked him for every gift, but her eyes remained distant, as if she were waiting for the moment it would all be taken away. The real barrier between them wasn't the luxury or the strangeness of the new environment. It was the silence. Arthur didn't know how to talk to a child. His conversations were filled with practical questions about food and sleep, devoid of any warmth or intimacy. He didn't know how to play, how to tell a story, how to simply be present. And Lyanna, in turn, seemed afraid to say the wrong thing, to break the fragile spell of her new life. One evening, exhausted after a day of tense meetings with his lawyers about Beatrice and Richard's veiled threats, Arthur entered the living room to find Lyanna sitting on the floor in front of the unlit fireplace. She held a small object in her hands, something he didn't recognize. He approached silently and saw it was a small wooden music box, worn and chipped at the edges. She opened it, and a delicate, Melancholy melody filled the silence. "What's that?" he asked softly, sitting on the rug at a respectful distance. "It was Mommy's," Liana whispered, not taking her eyes off the slowly turning ballerina. "She gave it to me, said it was her favorite song. She used to sing it to me before I went to sleep." Arthur felt a tightness in his chest. He knew that melody. It was Debussy's Clair de Lune. Helena used to play it on the piano on rainy nights, filling the house with a quiet beauty. It was a detail he had forgotten, buried under years of financial reports and stock quotes. The music, once a sweet memory, was now a reminder of all he had lost and all he had never known. And then Liana said something that changed everything. She closed the music box carefully and looked up at him, her eyes large and serious. "Mommy gave me something else too. She said it was a treasure, more valuable than all the gold in the world. She said I should only show it to you when I felt the time was right." With trembling little hands, she pulled something from the pocket of her new dress. It was a small, rusted key tied to a faded piece of string. She said it opens her house, her real house, where she kept all the secrets. The small metal key, warmed by the heat of Liana's hand, felt like it weighed a ton in Arthur's palm. It was an anachronistic object in his world of digital passcodes, facial recognition, and titanium credit cards. A key, a portal to a universe he never dreamed existed. He looked from the key to Liana's face, a face that was becoming more familiar each day, and saw the unshakable faith in her eyes. To her, this wasn't just a key, it was the embodiment of a mother's promise, a treasure that transcended any notion of monetary value Arthur knew, his own assets. His carefully catalogued possessions and high-yield investments suddenly seemed empty and soulless compared to this piece of rusted metal. "Where?" was all he managed to ask, his voice a whisper. Liana didn't answer with an address, but with a series of simple directions, as a child would. "After the big bridge, you turn where the wall has a painting of a smiling sun. Then you go straight until you find the street with the pink flower trees." It was a map of memories, not coordinates. Without questioning, Arthur stood, pocketed the key as if it were the most precious jewel in his vault, and held out his hand to Liana. She took it without hesitation, her small fingers closing around his. The drive in his luxury car was a transition between worlds. They left the polished concrete and mirrored glass of downtown Manhattan behind, crossed the big bridge, and plunged into a labyrinth of narrower, more vibrant streets in Queens. The hermetic silence of the vehicle was broken by the sounds of life from outside. Loud music, children shouting at play, the call of a street vendor. Arthur saw the wall with the smiling sun and turned. The landscape changed again. The houses were smaller, attached, painted in bright colors that defied the city's gray, flower pots balanced on windowsills, and laundry dried on lines strung between alleyways. Liana, for the first time since she'd arrived at the penthouse, seemed relaxed, at home. "It's there," she said finally, pointing to a street lined with cherry trees in full bloom. At the end of the street was a small corner house with a low iron gate and a small garden that, though a bit neglected, still showed signs of care. A jasmine vine climbed the wall, its white blossoms exuding a sweet perfume. It was simple, modest, yet it radiated a sense of peace. Arthur's heart was hammering. Helena, his Helena, the woman who organized gala dinners for hundreds, who wore haute couture gowns, had lived here. He parked the car, an alien and opulent object on this humble street, and got out. Neighbors peeked curiously from their windows, but no one approached. He and Liana walked to the small gate. Arthur took the key from his pocket. His hand was shaking so much he had trouble fitting it into the lock of the wooden door. He looked at Liana. She nodded, her eyes shining with anticipation. This was the moment, the end of the mystery or the beginning of an even greater pain. He took a deep breath and turned the key. A dry, metallic click echoed in the afternoon quiet. The door, stuck from disuse, resisted for a moment before giving way with a long, drawn-out groan. He pushed it open slowly, revealing a sliver of the darkness within. And then a gust of air came from inside, carrying with it a scent that froze him in place. It wasn't the smell of mold or abandonment he had expected. It was the scent of dried lavender and chamomile tea, the same fragrance that for years had perfumed the pillows on his bed, the unmistakable scent of Helena's sanctuary. Arthur stood frozen on the threshold, the scent of lavender and chamomile enveloping him like a phantom embrace. It was an aroma so intrinsically linked to Helena that for a moment of pure disorientation, he almost expected to see her emerge from the gloom, drying her hands on an apron with the smile he kept in his locket. Liana, however, didn't hesitate. She let go of his hand and stepped inside with the familiarity of someone returning home. Her light footsteps echoed on the wooden floor as she moved to open the blinds, allowing dusty shafts of light to slice through the darkness, revealing the small living room. The place was modest, almost Spartan, but every object seemed to have been chosen with love and purpose. A small sofa covered in a colorful crochet blanket, a crammed bookshelf with children's books mixed among classic novels, and a painter's easel in a corner, an unfinished canvas draped with a white cloth. On the main wall, a series of photographs in simple frames told a silent story. Arthur drew closer, his heart tightening. They were photos of Liana, a baby Liana wrapped in a blanket. Liana taking her first steps, supported by a hand that was out of frame. Liana on her first day of school, with a backpack bigger than she was. And in every photo, Liana wore a small silver locket, a simpler version of his own. "Mommy took pictures of me all the time," Liana said, her soft voice coming from a corner of the room. "She said it was so my guardian angel wouldn't forget what I looked like." Arthur felt like an intruder, a spectator to a life that should have been his. The simplicity and warmth of this house were a stark counterpoint to his cold, impersonal penthouse. Here, in this small space, was more life and love than in all the square footage of his mansion. His empire, built with such effort, his capital that multiplied day by day, seemed insignificant before the emotional wealth contained within these walls. While Liana explored her old room, a small space with glow-in-the-dark stars stuck to the ceiling, Arthur continued his silent exploration. On the end table next to the sofa lay a leather-bound journal. He hesitated, feeling he was about to violate Helena's final privacy. But the need to understand, to fill in the blanks, was stronger. He opened it to the first page. Helena's elegant script filled the lines. The date was from just over 7 years ago. "I found out today. A new life is growing inside me. My heart is overflowing with a terrifying joy. How will I tell Arthur? He's so focused on his deals, on his legacy of steel and glass. How do I make him understand that the greatest legacy is made of flesh, bone, and love?" He turned the pages, devouring years of secret thoughts and feelings. He found her pain after the conversation in the library, her decision to step away to protect the child from his potential rejection, the hardship of raising Liana alone on limited funds, but also the immense joy the girl brought her. Every word was a stab to his heart, revealing the depths of his own selfishness and blindness. Then he reached one of the last entries. The handwriting was a little shaky, less firm. "The illness is consuming me faster than I'd hoped. My only regret is not having the courage to find Arthur, but my pride, or perhaps my fear, stopped me. I have left Liana with the letter and the key. She is brave, more than I ever was. She will find him, and I've left something else, something that will prove everything and, perhaps, secure her future." Arthur stopped reading, his breath catching. Something else. He scanned the room, searching for a clue, anything. His gaze fell on the easel in the corner. The covered canvas. With a growing sense of premonition, he walked over and, with trembling hands, pulled off the white cloth that concealed it, and the air was stolen from his lungs. It was a portrait, an unfinished yet unmistakable portrait. A portrait of him. Helena had painted him from memory, seated in his armchair in the library, the gold locket gleaming on his chest. But the painting contained a detail that did not exist in reality. On the rug at his feet, playing with a teddy bear, was a little girl with his determined eyes and Helena's smile. The air around the easel seemed to thin, becoming dense and hard to breathe. The unfinished portrait wasn't just a painting, it was a testament, the ghost of a stolen future Helena had envisioned for them. Arthur traced the brushstrokes that formed his own face, capturing a melancholy he never knew he possessed. And there, at his feet, was Liana. Not as a stranger, but as an integral part of the scene, a connecting link that he, in his blind obstinacy, had refused to see. A profound sorrow, older and heavier than any financial loss he had ever faced, settled in his soul. He hadn't just lost Helena, he had lost 7 years of his daughter's life. 7 years of first steps, first words, nighttime fears, and morning laughter. Years that no amount of money, no fortune could ever buy back. Why does the man in the painting look so sad? Liana's voice, small and clear, broke his trance. She was beside him, looking at the painting with her head tilted. Arthur slowly knelt, bringing himself to her level. He looked from the girl in the painting to the real girl beside him, and the resemblance struck him with renewed force. I think he's sad, because he didn't know yet that he had the greatest treasure in the world right there at his feet, he said, his voice thick with emotion. Liana frowned. But treasures are in chests, not on the floor. Arthur managed a small smile, the first genuine one in a long time. Sometimes, the most valuable treasures are the ones you can hold. Without thinking, he pulled her into a clumsy hug. Liana stiffened for a second, surprised, then relaxed into his arms, her small body nesting against his chest. In that moment, amid the dust and memories of that little house, Arthur felt a seismic shift within him. The anger at Helena for keeping the secret began to dissolve, replaced by an overwhelming understanding of her fear and her love. She hadn't excluded him. She had been trying to protect them. The decision to return to the penthouse was difficult. Leaving that house felt like closing a book in the middle of the most important chapter. But Arthur knew he had to. The real battle wouldn't be fought here, in this sanctuary of peace, but in the world of glass and steel he inhabited. They locked the door, and Arthur kept the key and Helena's journal like sacred relics. The return to the sterile luxury of his home had never felt so oppressive. The penthouse's silence was no longer peaceful. It was empty. That night, while Liana slept in the pink room, Arthur was in his office, Helena's journal open on the polished mahogany desk. He read and reread her words, trying to absorb the magnitude of his own failure. That's when his private line rang, the light blinking in the darkness. It was Marcus, his lawyer. "Arthur, sorry to call this late, but it's urgent," Marcus said, his voice tense. "We've received official notice. Beatrice and Richard have filed a lawsuit. They are formally contesting your paternity of Liana." Arthur closed his eyes. He had been expecting this. "On what grounds?" "We have the DNA test. They're alleging fraud, manipulation of results, and emotional distress. They're painting a picture of you as a grieving, vulnerable man being exploited by a child and her unknown accomplices. They've petitioned the court for a new battery of tests, conducted by a team of their choosing, and an order to prevent you from altering any documents related to your estate until the matter is resolved." It was a declaration of war, a dirty, public war. They weren't just attacking his decision, they were attacking Liana's legitimacy, trying to turn her into a fraud in the eyes of the world. Arthur looked out the window at the city lights, an empire he had built with tooth and nail. But for the first time, he realized the most important battle of his life wouldn't be for his businesses or his net worth. It would be for the little girl sleeping in the next room. "Marcus," he said, his voice cold and filled with a new, fierce determination. "Prepare our team, use every necessary resource. They wanted a war, they'll get one." The days that followed turned Arthur's life into a legal and emotional battlefield. The penthouse, once a silent refuge, became a command center, with lawyers coming and going, stacks of documents covering once immaculate surfaces. The news of the lawsuit leaked to the press, just as he knew it would. Sensationalist headlines in financial papers and gossip columns painted the story in shades of greed and scandal. Billionaire Vance heir in paternity battle, the mystery girl who stands to inherit a fortune. Arthur did his best to shield Lyanna from the storm. He instructed Mrs. Gable to keep the televisions off and the newspapers out of her sight. He spent his evenings with her, helping with homework from an online tutoring program he'd arranged, reading her the books Helena had bought, trying to build a semblance of normalcy amidst the chaos. But he saw the tension in her small shoulders, the fear in her eyes when she overheard the lawyers speaking in low tones in another room. One night, as he was tucking her into bed, she turned to him, her small face serious against the soft pillow. "They think I'm a liar, don't they?" she asked. "Your family. They think I made it all up about Mommy." The question, direct and painfully honest, disarmed Arthur. He sat on the edge of the bed, searching for the right words. "No, sweetie," he said, his voice softer than he'd intended. "They don't think you're a liar. They're confused and scared. Sometimes when people are scared, they do and say things they shouldn't." "Scared of what?" she pressed. Arthur hesitated. How could he explain the complex and ugly web of greed, inheritance and entitlement to a 7-year-old? "They're scared of change," he finally answered. "And you are the biggest and best change that's happened in my life in a very long time, and that scares them." The explanation seemed to satisfy her for the moment. She snuggled under the covers, and he stayed by her side until her breathing grew slow and even. But the conversation left him deeply unsettled. He realized that in trying to protect Lyanna, he was failing in a crucial area. He wasn't earning her trust. She still saw him as the man with the locket, a figure of authority and protection, but not as a father. There was an emotional distance between them, a chasm of silence and unshared secrets. The next day, a discovery by his investigative team deepened the crisis. They had traced the last few years of Helena's life, and the records were heartbreaking. After her diagnosis, she had tried to contact him. There were letters, not just one, but several, sent to his office, all intercepted and returned stamped addressee unknown. Worse, they discovered that Helena had left the small house and a modest life insurance policy in Lyanna's name. The documents had been sent to the Vance family P.O.D. box, a central address for correspondence. Beatrice and Richard had received them, and they had hidden them. They had known. They had known about Lyanna's existence for over a year, and had chosen silence to protect their own stake in the inheritance. The revelation hit Arthur with the force of a body blow. It wasn't just greed, it was calculated cruelty. They had let their niece, their own blood, live in poverty and uncertainty while they clung to their privileged position. The fury gave way to a cold, empty ache. The family he supported, the people he thought would stand by him, had betrayed him in the most profound way possible. That night, the tension in the penthouse reached its peak. Lyanna, sensing the anguish radiating from Arthur, grew more and more withdrawn. She took her small backpack, the same one she wore on the first day of school in the photos, and began putting her few belongings inside: the music box, a few clothes, a storybook. Arthur found her near the service door. "What are you doing?" he asked, his heart sinking. "I'm leaving," she said, not meeting his eyes. "It's my fault, all this fighting, the people yelling. It's because of me. If I go away, everything will go back to the way it was. Mommy wouldn't want me to cause so much trouble. She was running away, running to protect him, just as Helena had done. The pattern was repeating, and Arthur found himself on the verge of losing everything all over again. The sight of Lyanna at the door, her small backpack on, was like a punch to Arthur's solar plexus. The air was knocked out of him. In that instant, he didn't just see his daughter trying to flee. He saw the echo of Helena's decision, a devastating pattern of withdrawal, born from a fear of causing pain. He was reliving the moment of loss, the same sense of powerlessness. But this time, he was here. This time, he could intervene. His first reaction, that of the CEO used to solving problems, was to issue a command, to tell her it was nonsense. But he swallowed the words. He saw the tremble in her lip, the fragile determination in her posture. She wasn't being defiant. She was trying to make a sacrifice. "Please, don't go," he said, his voice low and strained, afraid any louder sound might startle her into running. "We can fix this. I will fix this." Lyanna shook her head, the tears she'd been holding back finally spilling down her cheeks. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice broken. "It's always because of me. Mommy was sad sometimes too." She'd look out the window and cry quietly. She said she missed a man who worked so hard, he forgot how to live. She said she always hoped one day he would stop working and come find us. The words fell on Arthur like shards from a mirror, reflecting his entire life. A man who worked so hard he forgot how to live. It wasn't an accusation, it was a diagnosis. The truth, delivered with the brutal innocence of a child, demolished the last wall of his fortress of denial. His obsession with work, his drive to accumulate more wealth, more assets, more power, it wasn't ambition, it was escape. An escape from intimacy, from the risk of being hurt again, from the kind of connection Helena offered and that he, in his hubris, believed he could postpone. He had built an empire of numbers so he wouldn't have to deal with the equations of the heart. He had become a billionaire in capital but was emotionally bankrupt, and Helena had known. She hadn't left him out of anger but out of sorrow, hoping he would wake up in time. He knelt, ignoring the crack in his knees, until his eyes were level with hers. The distance between them felt infinite. With trembling hands, he reached to his neck and, for the first time in years, undid the clasp of the locket. He held it in his palm, the gold warm against his skin. Your mother was right," he said, his voice thick. "I was that man. I forgot how to live. I was so busy building things that I forgot to build what really mattered, and the biggest mistake of my life was not realizing it in time to tell her." He held the open locket out to Lyanna. Helena's photo smiled at them. "This locket," he continued, "I wore it to remember her, but I was doing it wrong. I used it to keep myself stuck in the past, alone. But her real place isn't here, locked in this gold. It's in you. It's in us. You are not causing trouble, Lyanna. You are saving me. You are my second chance." Lyanna's tears were silent now. She looked from the locket to his face, and for the first time, she saw past the millionaire, past the man with the locket. She saw a father. He pulled her into a hug, and this time there was no hesitation. She hugged him back with all her might, her face buried in his shoulder. They stayed that way for a long moment, the silence of the penthouse filled only with the sound of two hearts finally finding each other. When he let her go, he took her hand and kissed her palm. "No one is ever taking you away from me. No one will ever call you a liar again, I promise." He stood up, resolve etched onto his face. With Lyanna holding his hand tightly, he walked to his desk, picked up the phone, and dialed his lead attorney. When Marcus answered, Arthur's voice was steel. "Marcus, change of strategy. No more defense. We're going on the attack. I want a press conference tomorrow morning and prepare the lawsuits. We're exposing everything." The conference room at the city's premier hotel was packed with journalists and cameras. The air crackled with the anticipation of a scandal poised to rock one of the country's largest financial empires. When Arthur Vance walked in, dressed in a dark suit with an expression of calm resolve, a hush fell over the crowd. He didn't look like a man cornered. He looked like a king retaking his throne. He walked to the podium, not with the arrogance of a multimillionaire, but with the gravity of a father protecting his child. He didn't begin with legal jargon or vehement denials. He began with a story. He spoke of a young woman named Helena, her love of life, her fear, and her courage. And then he told the story of a little girl named Liana. With the help of a projector, he laid out the evidence his team had gathered, one piece at a time, in a methodical and merciless dismantling of his family's narrative. The first image was a copy of Helena's original letter. The second, copies of the several other letters she had sent, the return to sender stamps clearly visible. Next, he projected the documents for the life insurance policy and the deed to the small house, both in Liana's name, and the postal records that proved they had been received and concealed by Beatrice and Richard. The final blow was a high-resolution photograph of the unfinished painting. The image of Arthur, melancholic in his armchair, with little Liana playing at his feet, silenced any lingering doubt in the room. It was irrefutable proof that Helena had always seen them as a family. "My sister and brother-in-law," Arthur said, his voice firm but laced with sorrow, "were not trying to protect me from grief. They were trying to protect their own financial interests, their stake in my estate. They knew of my daughter's existence for over a year. They let her live in uncertainty while they enjoyed the comfort my work provided them." He paused, letting the weight of his words settle. "Their lawsuit is a sham, and they know it. Therefore, I am dropping my defense. Instead, I'm offering them a choice: withdraw all claims immediately and disappear from my life, or face a lawsuit for fraud, emotional damages, and misappropriation. The choice is theirs." News of the press conference hit Beatrice and Richard like a tidal wave. They watched in horror from their mansion as their world of lies crumbled on live national television. Within hours, their lawyers advised them to take Arthur's deal. The war was over. That night, the penthouse was finally quiet. The army of lawyers was gone. The media storm was beginning to subside. Arthur found Liana in her room, working on a jigsaw puzzle on the floor. She looked up as he came in. "Are they not going to bother us anymore?" she asked. "Never again," Arthur said, sitting on the floor beside her. He took a document from his pocket and placed it gently on the rug. It was Liana's amended birth certificate. Now with his name listed as the father, Liana Croft Vance. "Now it's official," he said, "in every way that matters." Liana looked at the paper, her fingers tracing his name. A small smile formed on her lips. Later, as they were sorting through some of the boxes he had brought from Helena's house, Arthur found something at the bottom of an old wooden trunk. It was a small blue velvet box, locked. Tied to it with a faded satin ribbon was a small envelope. Inside, a single note in Helena's handwriting. It simply said, "For when you two are finally ready to read the rest of our story together." The Sunday morning sun bathed the cemetery in a soft, golden light filtered through the leaves of ancient trees. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of cut grass and damp earth. Arthur and Liana walked silently down the stone path, her hand held firmly in his. He carried a bouquet of fresh lavender, and Liana clutched the small blue velvet box to her chest. They stopped before a simple but elegant white marble headstone, "Helena Croft Vance, beloved wife." Arthur felt the familiar knot form in his throat, but this time it wasn't just grief. There was gratitude and a newfound peace. He knelt and placed the flowers at the base of the stone. Liana sat beside him on the grass, setting the box carefully in her lap. "I think we're ready now," she whispered. Arthur nodded. He took the small key they had found in the envelope and fitted it into the box's lock. With a soft click, it opened. Inside, nestled on a white satin lining, were no jewels or valuables. There were more letters, dozens of them, tied in small bundles with different colored ribbons. They were letters from Helena, written over 7 years, letters to him, letters to Liana. They began to read, one at a time, aloud, their voices mingling in the quiet of the place. Eldina described Liana's first steps, her first words, Dada, she wrote, with both heartbreak and hope, her fear of thunderstorms, her love of drawing smiling suns. And to Arthur, she wrote of her longing, her hope that he would find his way back home, not to the mansion, but to the home they could have built together. It was a diary of love, loss, and unwavering hope. One of the last letters they read was addressed to both of them. My Arthur, my Liana, my greatest dream was to see this moment, the two of you together. Life gave me the gift of a wonderful daughter and the love of an extraordinary man. Arthur, forgive my silence, but know that every choice I made was out of love for you both. Liana, my little star, take care of your father. He has a heart bigger than any of his buildings. He just needs to be reminded how to use it. Don't live in the past, but learn from it. Build your own future, filled with laughter. I love you, beyond time and space. Tears flowed freely down Arthur's face, but they were not tears of sadness. They were of release. The burden of guilt and regret he had carried for so long finally began to dissipate, replaced by a profound sense of connection. 4 weeks after that fateful first meeting at the restaurant, the terrace of the Seraphine witnessed a different scene. Arthur and Liana sat at the same table, but the atmosphere had changed. A child's laughter had replaced the austere silence. Liana, in a new dress with her hair in a braid, was drawing on a napkin while telling an animated story about her first day at her new school. Arthur listened, truly listened, to her, each word a treasure more valuable than any stock on the market. The gold locket was still on his chest, but it was no longer a sanctuary of grief. When he opened it now, he saw Helena's face, but he also saw the reflection of Liana's eyes in the polished gold. It had become a bridge, a symbol that love never dies, it only transforms. He had learned that true wealth wasn't in his net worth, but in the depth of his connections. That the greatest investment wasn't in hedge funds or cryptocurrency, but in the time spent with those you love. The girl who had been seen as a grifter had shown him that the greatest miracles sometimes arrive disguised as beggars, to touch hearts hardened by ambition. And the millionaire, who had forgotten how to live, discovered that life, with all its unexpected turns, always offers a second chance to those brave enough to embrace it.